They did the mash. They did the Austen
mash.
The
They
Austen
did the
mash.
It was a ton-level smash.
They did the mash. They did the Austen mash. The Austen mash.
Oh, brother.
Will you marry me, Mr. Collins and potatoes?
You're doing lovely all on your own. I don't think I need to join in. Nor does anyone want to hear that.
Books. 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 Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that has been irreparably damaged by romance.
Boy. Let's say that more often.
I am your host, Grace Todd, and with me again this week to continue our discussion of Jane Austen's immortal Northanger Abbey is bestie of the pod, Maddie Wood.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello. Happy Friday. You won't be listening to this on a Friday. Happy Sunday, because you're a devoted listener who listens the day the episode drops. This one's for you.
I like to think that we comfort people on Sundays.
When you've got like Sunday scaries and you need something to listen to like on your way to the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're doing your mundanest errands, turn to us. Here, I didn't read it.
Here we are for you.
For you. For your errand running.
While you're doing the dishes.
Yes.
While you're trying to decide if you can get away with not doing laundry before next week starts.
Never can.
When you're
always testing the boundary, never can.
When you're gearing up for your Sunday shift because you have to work on Sundays.
Yes. Or thinking to yourself, is it easier to just buy more underwear?
I have been there recently.
I own, and this is not even like a fun brag or like a fun thing. It's just like, man, you've really stretched the bounds of how many underwear a human can own. Not even in like a fun, sexy way. Just in like a sad, depressed way. The best kind.
Wow. We're starting off like
Woo!
Up here.
Yeah, we are. It can only go up from here. Those peaks just keep getting higher.
Uh-huh.
Now, Grace, this is part 2. Give us your memory of part 1 of Jane Austen's, as you said, immortal Northanger Abbey.
Okay. Before I do this, I would like the audience to know that
I don't think they need to know.
Because of a scheduling whoopsie, more time has elapsed between when we recorded part 1 and now than it will have between you, the audience, listening to part 1 and part 2 being released.
Yes.
So it's been a solid
fortnight.
If
not slightly longer.
As Austen would say.
As she would say. Because I think, oh God, this is embarrassing. A fortnight's like 2 weeks, right?
A fortnight is 2 weeks.
Yeah, okay. It's been a fortnight and a half.
And I have recorded and edited multiple episodes.
In between.
Since then.
Yes.
Okay, here we go.
Yes.
Northanger Abbey.
By Jane Austen.
Our protagonist.
Yes.
What is her name?
Catherine.
Catherine comes from terminally naive and boring parents.
Yes.
She finally gets her big shot at sort of
the world,
launching herself into society and learning what the world is like when her extremely insufferable but well-meaning neighbor who talks constantly about herself and also clothes takes her to Bath.
Correct.
Her big launch into Bath is at first a huge bummer. No one will talk to her. Nobody knows her. Her hostess is not the kind of person who can get her like good social connections. And so it's a little bit like the first third of a high school movie when like the new kid is in town and nobody wants to hang out with them.
Yeah, because Mrs. Allen doesn't know anyone, but constantly wants to remind her that she doesn't know anyone. And how unfortunate it is that she doesn't know anyone.
Exactly. All of this changes when she finally meets
Isabella.
And Isabella's hot f***ing brother.
I don't know if I would call him hot f***ing brother, but...
Wait, no, Isabella is the frenemy.
Isabella is the frenemy that we've
Okay.
all known, and her brother John is like a horse himbo, like
Yes.
a horse
Okay.
a horse dummy.
I thought for a second that Isabella was the other young lady that we
No.
get soon.
No,
So,
hot satirical fun guy is Henry.
Okay, we have it, and we meet Henry briefly, but then we don't get a hold of him again for a little bit.
Yes.
Meanwhile, she makes her new best frenemy, Isabella, who sucks, and Isabella's brother, who is a sleazy
Dolt who hates to read.
horse himbo. Well, not even, because himbos have to be sweet.
That's
he's not
true.
a himbo. He's
No,
just a sleaze.
he's just like a dumb horse dude.
Yeah. Who is very intent.
A hummy. A horse dummy.
Nay.
It sounds like a sexual act. She gave me a good hummy. So sorry, listeners. Once the connection was made, I could not say it. You can cut this out. Yes, he's a hummy.
He is clearly like after her.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, Isabella does manage to get herself betrothed to
James.
James, who is
Catherine's brother.
Catherine's brother.
Yes.
Who is a big sweetie, but clearly not very bright because he wants to marry Isabella, who is terrible. In the midst of all this, we finally get back around to Henry,
Mm-hmm.
who is genuinely hot and very funny and like way sparkier than a lot of other Austen
Sparkier,
male
very
leads.
well read, like, and has a good sense of humor,
Yeah,
which, you know, her heroes are not known for.
very much a divergence from what became her kind of
Darcy profile.
brooding male lead.
In some ways, he's closer to a Bingley. Like, he's not dumb, but he is jollier and funnier.
Yeah, which is nice.
Yes.
Things almost are going swimmingly, but Isabella and John keep sort of strong-arming Catherine into committing faux pas, which, how do you pluralize faux pas?
Faux pas? Faux pauses. Faux pas. Faux pie. Faux.
Octipodes. Anyway, they keep putting her in situations where she has to commit a social sin by accident. Not accidental on their part, accidental
Very
on hers.
calculated on their part.
She nearly, like, mortally offends Henry and his delightful little sister,
Eleanor.
but she manages to pull it out of the bag at the last moment by literally chasing them down the
Yes.
street and flinging herself into their house, which again is giving High School movie, but that is neither here nor there.
Big running through the airport
Yeah.
in She's All That.
Yes. And as a result of her tenacity and her good-spiritedness and the fact that Eleanor and Henry's father clearly thinks of her like a sort of attractive horse. It's got like spirited filly all over it. She is invited out to the ancestral estate,
Northanger Abbey.
Northanger Abbey. And the last thing is that she's very excited about this, in part because the through line up until this point has been that she is obsessed with Gothic romances.
Yes, the only thing that she loves more, the only thing she thinks of more than Henry is Gothic architecture, which seems insane, but that's fine. Neither here nor there.
Oh, so she's just Galen.
Yeah. Her passion for ancient edifices was next in degree to her passion for Henry Tilney.
That is Galen.
Yeah.
Friend of the pod and vampire correspondent Galen, who is obsessed specifically with Gothic architecture.
Well, what's not to love? Gargoyles, gloom.
I once bought her the like hardbound 100th anniversary special edition of Architect's Digest.
Gothic edition.
For Christmas. No, it was not a Gothic edition, sadly. But then she went like, ew. The bitch loves buildings.
Well, bitches do be loving buildings.
And I support her in
Yeah.
this. Anyway.
Yes, that's where we left. So now for the gripping second half.
Drum roll, please.
Drum roll, please.
Peal of thunder and lightning.
That was not a noise that anyone needed. I'm so sorry.
We're off to the Gothic mansion.
Well, we soon will be off to the Gothic mansion.
Oh.
So, before we leave, she's like obviously got to get her stuff and her affairs in order. And she's like, I'm so busy. I like didn't even realize I haven't talked to my bestie of all time, Isabella, in like 3 days. Isabella's acting very like odd and cagey. And Catherine, being the naive thing that she is like, don't be uneasy. Like, James will be here soon. Like, James is going to meet them. And she's like, oh, I'm not uneasy. I'm fine, girl. Everything's fine.
Oh, I forgot that Isabella is now trying to wiggle out of her marriage to James because she realized he was a
poor. Yes, he does not have the wealth. And she's like, no, it's just because I don't want to wait because I love him so much. And it's like, no, it's because he doesn't make the money that you assumed that he did.
I'm imagining the the guy on TikTok who wears the Snuggie and does very funny critical reviews of like people who are stocking their fridges with many ices and things like that.
No.
Oh, well, he's just like, you can't have many ices because you're poor in it. You're a povo.
You're a povo.
And I'm thinking of Isabel as him now.
That's fair. She's like, oh, I'm so glad that you're going. And like, it's supposed to be this beautiful, fine old building. And like, it's going to be amazing for you. And this whole time she's like shadily like glancing around. And finally, Catherine's like, who are you looking for? Like, are your sisters coming? Like, who's the deal? And she says, I am not looking for anybody. One's eyes must be somewhere. And you know what a foolish trick I have of fixing mine. When my thoughts are 100 miles off, I am amazingly absent. I believe I am the most absent creature in the world. Tilney says it is always the case with minds of a certain stamp. And so
what?
She's talking about Captain Tilney, Henry's brother, who shows up at like the very end of their trip.
Uh-oh.
And she flips this on Catherine. She gets a letter from John, and John has asked Isabella, his sister, to reinforce to Catherine his desire for Catherine.
If there's one thing that's even cooler than having a clearly sketchy frenemy, it's having a clearly sketchy frenemy who is also trying to bully you into marrying her turd of a brother.
Yep, there it is. Common trope.
Happens all the time.
Happens all the time.
Happened to me 3 times in high school.
I mean, truly, don't we all have a friend who married the turd of a brother turd? And Catherine is just sort of like shocked because she is like, I don't have any desire for your brother.
She's like, I don't recall saying I was interested, actually.
And that she like has never led him to believe any of this. You know, she just thought of him as a friend. And Isabella is like, oh no, you definitely have been flirting with him and like you definitely have been leading him on. Like, but I get it. And then she makes this statement. She says, but above all things, my dear Catherine, do not be in a hurry. Take my word for it, that if you are in too great a hurry, you will certainly live to repent. Tilney says there is nothing people are so often deceived in as the state of their own affections, and I believe he is very right. So, like, we're talking about herself while also trying to couch it in, like, talking about Catherine and John.
So, A of all, she and Tilney are 100% having an affair.
Wink!
And B of all, what?
Yeah. She's basically like, don't rush. I'm paying the price of rushing. And it's such a weird, unaware comment to make when you're talking to your fiance's sister.
If there's one thing Austen was almost bafflingly good at, it was writing people who were hilariously and tragically lacking in self-awareness.
Yes.
It was like one of her definitive strong suits.
Which makes me think like she clearly had someone or someones in her life to model this after. It's too good in some ways.
I feel like that is just a deeply human trait.
Yeah. Even now to this day, it's like, oh, I know that person. And so Tilney shows up and they flirt outrageously.
Ooh. And spicy.
And Catherine is just like mind boggled. She's like, what is going on?
She's like, aren't you engaged to my brother?
She leaves the interaction and she's trying to convince herself that the only reason that Captain Tilney could be flirting with Isabella as outrageously as he is that he doesn't know that she's actually engaged because they haven't made the full announcement. So she says, what could be meant by such unsteady conduct? What her friend could be at was beyond her comprehension. Isabella could not be aware of the pain she was inflicting, but it was a degree of willful thoughtlessness which Catherine could not but resent. James was the sufferer. So it's like, yeah, like, you're being rude. You're being a trollop.
You're cheating on my brother, basically.
In front of me? Such a weird thing.
Right here in front of my salad?
In front of my face? So later she's talking to Henry, and she basically sort of tells him without telling him, and is just like, oh, please let your brother know that Isabella is engaged. I know she hasn't told everyone, but like, he needs to know. He clearly doesn't know. And Henry's like, oh, my brother does know.
Henry's like, oh, that's the token brother who's a cad.
Yeah, that's cad brother. Every book has one. That's cad military brother. They're always in the military.
I think that was just what you did with sons who couldn't comport themselves well. Like,
I mean, yes, I do think it's also that. But...
Even then, that was very much like, if you had A of all, a second son, but B of all, a son who could not control his impulses well enough to function in society, it was like, well, stick him in the military. Maybe he'll die.
Maybe that embarrassment will just go away.
Like poor Dick Musgrove.
Poor Dick Musgrove. He basically is like, oh, like, he definitely knows. And Catherine is, like, bereft by this because she's like, well, then, like, why? She can't imagine, like, why a man would continue to flirt with a woman he knows is engaged to another man. So naive.
I keep forgetting that she is the Regency equivalent of someone who moved from...
She is country mouse.
The suburbs of Kansas.
Yes. And to not even, like, a big town. She just, like, moved to Wichita. Like, it's not like she's in London. Like, Bath is like, okay. And so he informs her that Captain Tilney will not be joining them in Northanger Abbey. And he's going to stay in Bath. And she is, like, even more, like, twisted by this. And he starts to sort of question her about, like, what... She very clearly wants him to do something about this. And he's like, he's his own person. Like...
Am I my brother's keeper?
Exactly. He says, no man is offended by another man's admiration of the woman he loves. It is the woman only who can make it a torment. She's basically like, oh, well, Isabella can't know. Like, she can't mean to be doing it. Like, she's very attached to my brother. And so he's like, oh, I get it. Like, she's in love with James, but she likes to flirt with Frederick. Like, she's like just like a trollop. Okay. And she's like, oh, no, like, she couldn't be flirting. Like, if you're in love, you can't flirt with someone else. She's 17.
Oh, my God. I take it back. She's not a suburbanite Kansan. She's a Mormon.
Yes. Or a Mennonite. And it comes down to, she's like, well, will you ask him to leave? Like, and come to Northanger Abbey with us? And, like, let's separate them physically? And he, again, pushes back and is like, well... Isn't that, like, even more insulting to your brother that the only way you can get his future, wife to stop flirting with another man is to, like, physically remove them from each other? And that kind of shuts her up.
I mean...
Fair.
A compelling point.
Yes, very fair.
She doesn't know how to behave.
He says, would he thank you, either on his own account or Miss Thorpe's, for supposing that her affection, or at least her good behavior, is only to be secured by her seeing nothing of Captain Tilney? Is he safe only in solitude, or is her heart constant to him only when unsolicited by anyone else?
Now, we as the readers, obviously Catherine is very naive. Obviously we are meant to understand that Catherine is very naive, and that her viewpoints, especially around what courtship looks like and what loyalty and marriage and relationships look like, are heavily influenced by all these Gothic novels she's been reading, which are very, very... The Gothic novels hinged very heavily on the sort of notion of tortured, predestined, there's no one for me but her.
The Tortured Poets Society?
Kind of love. That, like, very all-consuming...
Yes.
Why can't I quit you sort of perspective on affection. And so that carries through. Like, I can see that thread being drawn. But what are we to make of Henry's counter argument? Are we to
I read Henry's counter argument as, like, a little bit of Jane's, like, what she would have said.
Is Henry doing this because he knows that Isabella and James's relationship is going to fall apart, and it probably should? Is Henry telling her to let it kind of take its course, or does he believe what he's saying? Does that make any sense?
I think that he is trying... First off, I think he finds her naivety so attractive, and he enjoys the, like, banter of it. And the, like... And a little bit pedantic of, like, let me, like, open your world up and, like, make you think of different things and try exotic foods. And, like it's much more that vibe.
Okay.
Of, like, let me show you a different perspective. In part, I think because he wants her not to not be as naive, because he definitely is, like, horny for that. But he wants her to think about things in, like, a slightly more adult way or realistic way.
Yeah, like the verbal sparring makes sense and is carrying through. I was just trying to understand how much kind of dramatic irony underpins Henry's perspective.
I think he knows what's going to happen, doesn't want to come out and exactly say it, but wants to give her some inklings so that she starts to think more critically herself.
Right. And he's also like, babe,
my brother...
What is interfering going to accomplish?
Yes.
Exactly nothing.
Exactly. So it's the day of departure, and she is so nervous. Just like...
all aflutter.
All aflutter. Henry and Eleanor are being very kind and, like, smile, like... They can sense, I think, that she's nervous, and they're trying to sort of calm her down. And on the flip side, the general is being, like, so over-solicited that she is made more uncomfortable by the fact that she's like, if he had just treated me like one of his kids, it would have been fine. But because he's treating me like I'm rolling out the red carpet, she's like, oh, I don't know what to do. His anxiety for her comfort, his continual solicitations that she would eat, and his often expressed fears of seeing nothing to her taste made it impossible for her to forget for a moment that she was a visitor. And so she's, like, very aware that she is the out-of-place person, coupled with the fact that this is the first time she sees in person. He's so mean and weird to his kids. He's constantly just like, ugh, let's go. And then, like, he'll turn to her and be like, is the food not to your liking? And she's like, wait, what? And she's very uncomfortable.
I know you have already told me that this is not what he's doing and that this is not where it's going, but it reminds me so much of what it's like to be around a, like, kind of dirty old man as a young, attractive woman, where I have known many dirty old men because I am the kind of person who objectively kind of likes drinking beers with a bunch of dirty old men in bars. And there's a funny sort of tension there where, like, they know you're not gonna f them. Like, they know it's not gonna happen, but they also kind of like to think on some...
that they could get it.
...level, you know, your attention is flattering for them.
Yeah.
And it's just still giving that so much.
I definitely see that and definitely, like, put my own experience onto it. What I think the character reads more is in some ways like a male version of Mrs. Bennet.
Okay.
Does that help inform a little bit?
It's shaping up.
Yeah. Okay. Keep that nugget in mind. Like, he's not coming out and being like, marry my second son, but it's more that vibe of sort of, like, tripping over yourself to impress than it is like, I'm gonna put my hand on your thigh.
Fair. It's still giving fine young Philly,
yes,
but sure.
Yes, all of it can be true and is. So they finally leave, and the general just, like, he sucks. He's, like, really, really critical of his kids and of the whole process, and nothing is up to his standards. And so they make this stop at this inn to change the horses and everything. And he's like, well, for this next part of the ride, you should ride with Henry so that you're outside and you'll be able to see as we come into Northanger Abbey. Like, I know how much you like the buildings. And on one hand, she's like, well, wait, isn't that, like, scandalous? Because I thought, like, I shouldn't have done that with John, and it was, like, a scandal. But if he suggests I do it, like, it must be fine. And so she gets up there and she's talking about how excited she is to see Northanger Abbey. And this is where he starts to tease her.
Henry does.
Yes. In a way that I thought was super funny. He says, "And are you prepared to encounter all the horrors that a building such as what one reads about may produce? Have you a stout heart, nerves fit for sliding panels and tapestries?" And she's just like, "Oh, yes, I love it. Like, I don't think I'll be frightened." And then he starts to like weave this hypothetical tale for her on the ride. First is like, well, we'll get there and it will be dark and you'll have to be led up by this hypothetical housekeeper that he names Dorothy, who is like ancient and will like be very cold to you, and she's going to lead you into a different wing of the house where someone's died in one of the rooms, and like, can you stand it? She was like, "Oh, well, like that won't happen to me. Like, it'll be fine." And he says, "How fearfully will you examine the furniture of your apartment? And what will you discern? Not tables, wardrobes, or drawers, but on one side perhaps the remains of a broken lute, on the other a ponderous chest which no efforts can open, and over the fireplace the portrait of some handsome warrior whose features will so incomprehensibly strike you that you will not be able to withdraw your eye from it. Meanwhile, Dorothy, no less struck by your appearance, gazes on you in great agitation and drops a few unintelligible hints. To raise your spirits, moreover, she gives you reason to suppose that the part of the abbey you inhabit is undoubtedly haunted, and informs you that you will not have a single domestic within call." With this parting cordial, she curtsies off. You listen to the sound of her receding footsteps as long as the last echo can reach you. And when, with fainting spirits, you attempt to fasten your door, you discover with increasing alarm that it has no lock. And so she's like, "Ah!" She was like, "This is just like a book, like one of these gothic novels, but like, I'm sure your housekeeper's not really named Dorothy, right?" And he goes on and really gets in her head and like gets very theatrical. And finally, he gets to the point where she's like, "Okay, like, keep going. And he's like, "Okay." And he like starts to laugh at her and is like, "I can't keep going. Like, you're basically like too young and naive and taken with this story. Like, I can't take this seriously anymore."
Like, "Stop. Don't stop. Stop. Don't stop."
Mm-hmm. At this point, they finally are like very close to reaching the abbey, and the abbey comes in view. And it's not what she thought.
Oh, no.
But so low did the building stand that she found herself passing through the great gates of the lodge into the very grounds of Northanger without having discerned even an antique chimney. And she basically comes to find that, like, it's just a house. Like,
Boo.
She had built it up into this big thing. And it says, "Without feeling one awful foreboding of future misery to herself, or one's moment's suspicion of any past scenes of horror being acted within the solemn edifice, the breeze had not seemed to waft the sighs of the murdered to her."
I feel like this is what happens when certain Americans go to England and find out that the British also have ugly, boring, contemporary buildings.
Yeah, like a lot of the UK is ugly.
And, like, a lot of the UK is very attractive as well. But
Same, but, like, they have ugly 1970s homes just the same way we do here in America.
Yeah, it is not, like, wall-to-wall Downton Abbey on the one end.
Or,
and
like, pebbled
Dickensian tenements on the other hand.
No, it's just like, yeah, we have ugly split levels, and, like, they do too.
They have, in fact, demolished and erected new buildings since the Victorian era.
Yes.
It has been done.
And actually with increasing rate. So,
like, they also have big box stores.
Right. They have IKEAs there.
They have Sainsbury's out in the suburbs that are just as ugly as any Kroger you have ever walked into.
Yes. And while their treats might be more delicious, it's the same giant box that you will walk into. It says, "To an imagination which had hoped for the smallest divisions and the heaviest stonework, for painted glass, dirt, and cobwebs, the difference was very distressing." So she basically gets there and was like, Oh, man.
It's also extra funny to think of somebody from the early 1800s being like, it's not old and cool enough.
Yeah. And this is in like 1803.
Like, when do you want it to date back to?
Right. Like, how old do you need it to be? She gets led to her chambers, and they're just like a normal guest room.
They're like warm and cheerful and not drafty.
Exactly. Like, her room's 2 doors down from Eleanor. It's not in some like abandoned, decrepit wing where someone died. It's fine.
This haunted house sucks.
Remember, Henry's like very in her head still, even though so far it's not living up to her desires. And so she gets to her room. They're changing clothes and preparing for dinner, and she notices shoved in the corner of her room is a chest. Gasp. And so she goes and she's like tugging on this chest, and she cannot get it open, and she cannot get it open. Finally, she like pries it open, and she's like so nervous, and she's like little sweaty paws, and all that's inside is a blanket. And she's like, ugh.
Boo.
And now she's made them late for dinner, and she's just like very perplexed, and she's like, oh, I'm so stupid. Stupid Catherine. It's just a blanket. And so they get down, and the general's very irritated that they're late, but then like doesn't blame her and just like fusses endlessly at Eleanor for it. And so she feels bad. She's like, oh, sorry, friend. So they get back. She gets back to her room after dinner, and she decides like, all right, I'm going to stay up until the fire's burning low and there's no light in here, just to prove like I'm not scared of this room. Like, this room's fine. So of course, in the dwindling light, right as the fire's going out, she notices there's this big cabinet. And in Henry's story, there was a cabinet, and she's like, oh, I know, I thought I learned my lesson with the chest, but this cabinet. And so she's like pulling open every like cupboard and drawer. They're all empty, and she's like, fine. And then finally she comes upon this drawer that's locked.
Oh.
It's like a false drawer, and she pulls and it opens, and there's papers inside, and she's like, because in Henry's story they found papers, and it was like, you know, the confessions of a murderer. And she's like, oh my God, it's a green cabinet, and I just found papers. And right as she finds them, her candle goes out and the fire goes out. And so now she must wait until morning. And so she's lying there just like basically hyperventilating about like what she's potentially found, and like, oh my God, and she's like tossing and turning. What could they contain? Oh my God, oh my God. And she like starts awake in the morning, and it's the first thing she does, and it's a laundry manifest.
So she is the what year?
17.
So she is the 1817 equivalent of those girls who listen to too much true crime and then
Yes.
make TikTok videos about how they were almost kidnapped in a Target.
Yes, or the like ones that make those elaborate videos about all the things you should do in a hotel room to make sure that no one's making porns with you, and like how to put something under the door to make sure that no. Yeah, there was a movie, a very formative horror movie that I watched as a very young adult called Urban Legend with Joshua Jackson. And in it, a series of college students die, and each of them dies by being murdered in a specific urban legend. One of the murders, like, someone's in your back seat when you get in, and then they like stab you. And then there's like she is urban legend.
It's so funny to think of gothic romances being positioned as the same kind of brain poison as too much true crime.
Yes.
Like,
or as like you watched Hostel before you went on your backpacking trip to Europe. It says, she felt humbled to the dust. Could not the adventure of the chest have taught her wisdom? A corner of it, catching her eye as she lay, seemed to rise up in judgment against her. Nothing could now be clearer than the absurdity of her recent fancies. Just suppose that a manuscript of many generations back could have remained undiscovered in a room such as this, so modern, so habitable, or that she could be the first to possess the skill of unlocking a cabinet, the key of which was open to all.
yeah, and now that you mention it, who keeps their sketchy documents in their guest bedrooms?
Exactly, Catherine. That's for hiding in your own personal chambers.
I don't keep sketchy documents in my guest bedroom.
I've been in it. It's not full of sketchy documents.
It's full of recording equipment.
Yes. And books.
Crafting supplies.
Yes, the normal things in a guest room. So she is like very, like, she feels so silly. She's like so full of shame, and she's, heaven forbid that Henry Tilney should ever know her folly. Like, oh God, the shame. With all of this in mind, she's like, okay, I'm like gonna like have a little mind reset. I'm gonna put out like this crazy story Henry told me. I'm putting it out of my head. Turns out Henry has a estate nearby that he runs and is his seat.
We love a man with a spare estate.
We love a man with a landed gentry.
Hot.
Could vote.
I want to marry landed gentry.
I am my own landed gentry. And so he leaves. And he's like, I gotta go do some errands at my house or whatever. I gotta go take care of some stuff. And so it's just her and Eleanor and the general. And he's like, as promised, I'm going to take you on an illustrious tour of the grounds and of the abbey. And she's so excited. But then he wants to start in the gardens. And she's like, this is the thing I care the least about.
Flowers are boring. Where are the dead nuns?
Tell me where the wind carrying the murdered folks are. And so they walk through all these gardens. They get to this like certain path. And Eleanor starts to walk down it. And he's like, don't go that way. Why are you going that way? And she's comes to find out like this was her mother's favorite path. She says, I used to walk here so often with her, added Eleanor, though I never loved it then as I have loved it since. At the time, indeed, I used to wonder at her choice, but her memory endears it now. And Catherine says, and ought it not to endear it to her husband? Yet the general would not enter it. And so this is the first time they sort of talk about the fact that Mrs. Tilney is dead, which we know, but like they go into it. And Catherine, the fact that the general doesn't want to walk on this path, Catherine immediately spins this, having learned nothing from the chest or the cabinet.
Oh, wait. He murdered her? Is that where we're going?
Of her unhappiness in marriage, she felt persuaded. The general certainly had been an unkind husband. He did not love her walk. Could he therefore have loved her?
Oh, girl, no.
And besides, handsome as he was, there was something in the turn of his feature which spoke his not having behaved well to her.
Oh, no. She's going to accuse her potential father-in-law of murder in front of the man that she has a crush on.
She really likes, this is where this really starts to spin. And she was like, well, surely like he keeps a portrait of her in his room. And Eleanor's like, no. He didn't like how it turned out, and so it's in my bedroom. And I'm like, I'd love to show it to you. And Eleanor's just kind of like, okay, we're talking about my dead mom, but like she's not really seeing the machinations that are happening in her mind. And so it says, a portrait very like of a departed wife, not valued by the husband. He must have been dreadfully cruel to her. Oh. So the fact that he doesn't like to walk where she walked and didn't want to keep her portrait is apparently like something too far.
It's definitely not that it's like too painful for him. It's that he's a monster.
Yes, aversion.
Who killed her.
His cruelty to such a charming woman made him odious to her. So not only is he a murderer, but like now he's disgusting to her.
What a teenager.
And so they get back to the end of the path and the general's like, I need to take a quick break before we start the actual tour of the house, which is the only part that she has cared about. And then they get on the tour and she's like, I mean, it's fine. And at the very end, they reach a wing. Eleanor goes to go up it and is like, this is my mother's wing. And the general does not want them to do that. It says the general's evident desire of preventing such an examination was an additional stimulant. Something was certainly to be concealed. Her fancy, though it had trespassed lately once or twice, could not mislead her here. And what that something was, a short sentence of Miss Tilney's, as they followed the general at some distance downstairs, seemed to point out. I was going to take you into what was my mother's room, the room in which she died, were all her words. But few as they were, they conveyed pages of intelligence to Catherine.
Oh, Catherine.
He doesn't let them go up there, so of course she's like, he murdered her in that room, and I have to see it, like little Nancy Drew that I am. Oh. And so she's having the conversation about, like, oh, like, how long has your mother been dead? And then she finds out that Eleanor was not at home. Eleanor says her illness was sudden and short, and before I arrived, it was all over.
Bum, 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 bum!
Catherine's blood ran cold with the horrid suggestions which naturally sprang from these words. Could it be possible? And that not only did he kill her, but that maybe, like, he prolonged... Like, he, like, kept her up in this wing, and, like, it really devolved.
Locked her in an attic.
Exactly. Very Jane Eyre-ish. When will we learn wives in attics? Doesn't end well.
I mean, the wife that I keep in my attic seems to like it well enough.
I mean, look.
She's having a great time.
Look.
She's got her own little DoorDash account. I send her flowers.
Good for you. And so she really spins on this. And she's like, I have got to get up to that ring.
I've uncovered a romantic mystery.
I have got to get up there. They go to church together first, and they see on the grounds that he did erect a monument for her.
I'll erect your monument.
Oh, wink. And it says the erection of the monument itself could not in the smallest degree affect her doubts of Miss Tilney's actual decease. She's like, ugh, what... Okay, so he put a monument up? Like, whatever. He definitely murdered her.
Cool story, bro. Let me see your hands.
Basically, it says, were she even to descend into the family vault where her ashes were supposed to slumber, were she to behold the coffin in which they were said to be enclosed, what could it avail in such a case? Catherine had read too much not to be perfectly aware of the ease with which a waxen figure might be introduced.
So she's now decided that not only did he murder his wife, not only did he torture his wife, but that he did away with the body sketchily, or that he's got her imprisoned somewhere and she's not actually dead.
That he did away with her in a sketchy, maybe that she, was bloodied and battered, and so he had to introduce a wax figurine.
Sure.
So there's that. And so she sneaks up there, and then she gets up there and she's like, oh, it's just like a normal room.
It's just an unused room.
A large, well-proportioned apartment. It's just fine. Astonishment and doubt first seized them, and a shortly succeeding ray of common sense added some bitter emotions of shame.
Honey.
Like, once again, I don't know what you thought you were gonna walk into, but it's just a room.
This is the kind of naive, misguided thrill seeker that escape rooms are meant to keep in check.
Yes. Have you learned nothing from escape rooms, Catherine?
If she had an escape room, she would tire herself out like a border collie.
Yes. She needs something to herd. She needs to exercise more. And so she's creeping out of the wing. She hears something. She's like, oh no, the general's going to find me. And like, what am I even going to say? He said not to come up here.
And then he's going to murder me.
Oh no. Who pops up but Henry, home from his estate.
NBD, babe, I was just investigating your mother's death.
And so he's like, what are you doing up here? And she tries to be like, well, what are you doing here? Like, why did you come this way? Like, what's happening? And he's like, well, these are the back stairs. Like, this is where this comes. And then he's like, well, why are you up here? And she's like, well, your mother, she like died so suddenly. And then like Eleanor couldn't show me this. And perhaps like he didn't like love her that much because he didn't want to walk on her walk. And he says, and from these circumstances, he replied, his quick eye fixed on hers, you infer perhaps the probability of some negligence, or it may be of something still less pardonable. My mother's illness, he continued, the seizure which ended in her death, was sudden. The malady itself, one from which she had often suffered, a fever, is cause therefore constitutional. Basically, he's like, what the During the progress of her disorder, Frederick and we were both at home, saw her repeatedly, and from our own observation can bear witness to her having received every possible attention which could spring from the affection of those about her.
It's like, calm down, you ghoul.
If I understand you rightly, you had formed a surmise of such horror as I hardly have words to. Dear Miss Morland, consider the dreadful nature of the suspicions you have entertained. What have you been judging from? Remember the country and age in which we live. Remember that we are English, that we are Christians. Consult your own understanding, your own sense of the probable, your own observation of what is passing around you. Does our education prepare us for such atrocities? Do our laws connive at them? Could they be perpetrated without being known in a country like this, where social and literary intercourse is on such a footing? Where every man is surrounded by a neighborhood of voluntary spies, and where roads and newspapers lay everything open? Dearest Miss Morland, what ideas have you been admitting? And she runs.
Understandably.
Weeping.
He just read her to filth.
Yes, yes. And
Like-
well deserved. Well deserved.
You need to calm all the way down. You need to think about the consequences of the things that you're saying. And you need to put the cell phone down and stop making true crime content.
Correct. You need to back away from TikTok. The visions of romance were over.
Oh.
Catherine was completely awakened. Most grievously was she humbled. Most bitterly did she cry.
Oh.
And so she's just like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing.
I mean, at least she learned a lesson instead of doubling down.
Very true. And she goes down and he's so nice to her. Like, he's like sort of concerned. She runs off crying and like she just is baffled by the fact that he's still being like very polite and like kind to her. But as we've talked about in other podcasts, there is this like fun touch of like, we're English.
Yeah. I was immediately thinking about the end of A Modern Circe, which we did for one of the Halloween episodes. And there's that whole little bit at the end where she's like, imagine if we had been in England instead of Italy.
Well, funny you say. Charming as were all Miss Radcliffe's works, and charming even as were the works of all her imitators, it was not in them, perhaps, that human nature, at least in the Midland counties of England, was to be looked for. Of the Alps and Pyrenees, with their pine forests and their vices, they might have a faithful delineation, and Italy, Switzerland, and the south of France might be as fruitful in horrors as they were represented. But in the central part of England, there was surely some security for the existence even of a wife not beloved in the laws of the land and the manner of the age. But in England, it was not so. Among the English, she believed, in their hearts and habits, there was a general, though unequal mixture of good and bad. And so basically, like, yeah, she can write these Gothic romances in these other countries where people might not be good and wholesome and Christian, but here we're English.
Absolutely love that Italy made the list.
Yep, right. As you were saying it, I was like, oh, just wait.
Thus continuing didn't read its streak of Italy slander.
Yes. Don't come for us, Italy.
We're sorry.
We're sorry.
We're not writing the books. We're just talking about
I'm
them.
so sorry. So
Now that we're done slandering Italy.
now that we're done slandering Italy and that we have confirmed that English is the best, most wholesome Christian country that's ever lived, Henry sort of treats it as if it didn't happen, and she does the same. And it's just sort of like, well, he took her to task and now it's fine.
And she's been cured?
Yes, of her naivete. And so now what starts to enter her mind is like, oh man, I've been here for like a little bit and I have not heard from Isabella once. And she said she was going to write me every day. I wonder what's happening.
My frenemy isn't writing to me.
God, I wanted to talk to my frenemy. She does get a letter.
Whoop.
But it is from James. And it starts with, though God knows with little inclination for writing, I think it is my duty to tell you that everything is at an end between Miss Thorpe and me.
Who could have seen that coming?
I left her and Bath yesterday, never to see either again. And he basically is like, I'm done, and I hope you're having fun, and I'm going home, and I'm really glad that I saw her for who she was before we actually could get married.
Yeah, fair.
Great. He ends it, "Dearest Catherine, beware how you give your heart." Henry is watching her read this letter the whole time, and she's getting like more and more distressed. And she's crying at the breakfast table, and she like runs, and she's like trying to find a room to just like weep in, but every room she goes in, there's like maids like tidying, and she's like, and so she finally ends up in...
Okay, so there's like a Scooby-Doo section where she can't find a place to cry.
It's like 3 or 4 lines, but she basically is like, she runs from, then she goes to a room with the maids are in it, she tries to go this, and so finally she ends up in this like drawing room, and it turns out Henry and Eleanor are also in there. And they're talking about her and are trying to be like, is she okay? Like, she's like running around the house weeping, like, what's going on? And so she finally tells them the letter references Captain Tilney directly.
Uh-oh.
It says, "I wish your visit at Northanger Abbey may be over before Captain Tilney makes his engagement known, or you will be uncomfortably circumstanced." James is of the belief that Tilney and Isabella are going to be engaged. And this is part of what she shares with the two of them, that their brother is potentially already engaged to Isabel.
Which would be a big no-no, since their father knows nothing about it.
Correct. Henry says, "I'm very sorry for Mr. Morland. Sorry that anyone you love should be unhappy. But my surprise would be greater at Frederick's marrying her than at any other part of the story." Like, basically, like, over my dead body is my cad brother engaged to your trollop of a former friend. Like,
just like, no, you don't get it. My brother is a real boy.
And so then they start to like ask questions about Isabel and her family. Like, do they come from money? Like, does she have a fortune? And as she answers these questions, they more and more are like, oh, definitely not. Like, even more no. They get to this point where they both sort of convince her, like, we just don't think that there's any way that it's possible that they're actually engaged. And she is just so overwrought with her feeling of, like, I can't believe I've been so deceived by someone and someone's character. I thought I knew this person, and here she's, like, done this, like, terrible thing.
She's learning so much in such a short period of time.
But then Henry, like, sometimes can't help himself from, like, making, like, a kind little jab. So she says, "I never was so deceived in anyone's character in my life before." And he says, "Among all the great variety that you've known and studied." Like, you've known like 6 people.
Oh, honey.
But the fact that she is so like moved by this, and like the fact that she's been betrayed by her friend and who she really wholeheartedly believed up until now was like a good person or whatever, is very endearing to him. He says, "You feel, as you always do, what is most to the credit of human nature. Such feelings ought to be investigated, that they may know themselves."
We love a wide-eyed innocent.
We do. They all sort of are on the same page, and by the end of that chapter where they're like, okay, I don't think they could probably be engaged, but we're really sorry. It sucks for your brother, but probably for the best in the long run.
Yeah.
And they have this interaction where they're going to go to Henry's estate. They're all going to go to Henry's estate for the day. Make a day of it, like a little day trip. I guess this is very out of character for the general, that he would even like want to go visit his children's home. Henry's like, I gotta go, because I gotta go and like prepare for you guys to all come to my house.
I have to go panic clean.
Exactly, like, it's a smaller house, but like she's like, this is so sweet, and it's just lovely, and she's like had such an amazing day. She gets back and there's a letter from Isabel.
Uh-oh.
And she's like, oh, sorry, babe, for not writing you sooner. I haven't heard from your brother since he left for Oxford. Like, it says, your kind offices will set all right. He's the only man I ever did or could love, and I trust you will convince him of it. So clearly, like, Tilney has been like, I'm not marrying you. And now she's like, let me back up.
Tilney has failed to propose, and so now she's going to try and get back with the last guy who would have her. Yep.
Yes, and not only that, but she talks shit about him. It says, He went away with his regiment 2 days ago, and I trust I shall never be plagued with him again. The last 2 days, he was always by the side of Charlotte Davis. I pitied his taste, but took no notice of him.
Not Charlotte Davis.
I know.
Anyone but Charlotte Davis.
And basically, she's like, I am so unhappy because I haven't heard from him, and he went away, and he seemed like he was in such bad spirits, or like maybe he had a cold. Like I would write to him myself, but have mislaid his direction. This is the first time you see her sort of be reflective enough to be like, oh, I see you, which is like a departure. Yeah.
She's finally matured enough to call bullshit. Mm-hmm. Good for her.
Such a strain of shallow artifice could not impose even upon Catherine. Its inconsistencies, contradictions, and falsehoods struck her from the very first. She was ashamed of Isabella and ashamed of having ever loved her.
She said, even I'm not that naive anymore.
Write to James on her behalf? No. James should never hear Isabella's name mentioned by her again. She must think me an idiot, or she would not have written so. But perhaps this has served to make her character better known to me than mine is to her. I see what she has been about. And so it's this nice, like, oh, like you're growing up.
Yeah.
Look at you.
We're maturing.
Look. So the general has gone to London. It's just Eleanor and Henry and Catherine at the house, and they're having a lovely time without him. His departure gave Catherine the first experimental conviction that a loss may sometimes be a gain. Henry has to leave and like go run an errand, so it's just her and Eleanor at the house, and they have this discussion. She's very aware, like, okay, I've been here a month, like I don't want to overstay my welcome. And they both do that thing where she's like, well, you hang up first. No, you hang up first. And she's like, well, I could go. And Eleanor's like, well, I mean, if you want to go. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't want to go, but like I should. And so finally they like agree, like, oh, you should definitely stay. You should stay longer. And they have this like nice little friend moment.
Cute.
Several days later, they are chit-chatting. Door rings. Eleanor goes to get it, comes back, and she is distraught. And Catherine is like, oh my God, like, are you...
What happened?
Like, what's wrong? Are you okay? What can I do? And she says, you are too good, I am sure, to think the worst of me for the part I am obliged to perform. I am indeed a most unwilling messenger. After what has so lately passed, so lately been settled between us, how joyfully, how thankfully on my side, as to your continuing here as I hoped for many, many weeks longer, how can I tell you that your kindness is not to be accepted, and that the happiness your company has hitherto given us is to be repaid by, and I must not trust myself with words, my dear Catherine, we are to part. And so basically her dad has sent this letter, the general, and is like, I forgot that we were supposed to go to this other lord's house, and like we have to leave right now, and Catherine, you have to leave immediately.
That's sketchy.
That's suspicious. And she's like, well, wait, like, right?
Like this moment?
Yes. Basically, it's like, get your bags and you have to get out. She's like, no, he's like arranged a hack to come get you. It will be here in 30 minutes. You have to get out.
A fine young filly no longer.
Yes.
We have been demoted.
Eleanor has to give her some money to make sure she can get home. And she makes the ride unaccompanied.
Wow.
Yes.
Something has happened.
Something has transpired. She just is sort of in shock, as you would be.
Yeah.
She's like, I don't really know what I did.
This is the great moment for every Austen heroine where they're like, my life is ruined.
Catherine was too wretched to be fearful. And so, like, she's on this, like, sort of socially inappropriate journey by herself, unaccompanied, on all this, like, public transport. She's like on her way home and she's like, well, I'm too sad to even be scared of the fact that I really shouldn't have done it, be like doing this at all.
That I, the most naive woman alive, have been sent by myself in a cab.
Exactly. A heroine in a hack post-chase is such a blow upon sentiment as no attempt at grandeur at pathos can withstand.
Oh, baby.
So she gets home and her family is understandably like excited but also surprised to see her. They're kind of like, hey, love you, what are you doing here, girl?
Can you imagine if you like went on vacation with your girlfriend as a teenager and then showed back up on a Greyhound unannounced?
Yes, or like pulled up in like an Uber alone.
From a different town, though?
Yes, where you had been staying. And so she gets home and she's like just so sad, and she tells her mom, and her mom's basically like, you're never going to understand why he did this. And so like, don't trouble yourself with it. Like, don't needlessly like worry over it. It's not something like worth understanding, this like very rude man. And she just is like so bereft and like sad and changed by her experience. And it says she could neither sit still nor employ herself for 10 minutes together, walking around the garden and orchard again and again, as if nothing but motion was voluntary.
Aw, baby.
I know. They visit the Allens, and they're walking back, and who do they come upon but Henry?
What?
Henry! He basically has like come to explain himself and themselves
I should hope so.
to them, so that, which obviously he has a lot of explaining to do, because her parents, like, everyone's like, the fuck, my guy, and he's like, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. And as is every shitty thing that happens in this book, we can blame it on Isabel's hummy of a brother. If you will remember, there is a scene before they leave Bath where Catherine sees John and the general talking to each other. And John later tells her, like, oh, we were talking about you, the most beautiful girl in Bath. And she's like, huh, okay. Turns out what he was telling the general is that she, like, came from money. Everyone had assumed because she was there with the Allens, and the Allens had no children, that she was, like, their direct beneficiary.
Oh.
Also why they were interested in James, I guess. Like, there was all this misconception about how much money they had. And so the general was like, oh, hell yeah, for my second son. And so was like courting her on behalf of Henry. Then he goes to London, sees John, whose now sister has been like found out and they're no longer attached, and is like, oh yeah, they're poor as hell. And the general is like, get her out of my house. No pores here.
Be gone.
Get out.
I see what you mean about Mrs. Bennet.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh. We get this like very it's explaining how Henry's affections for her have grown. And this is her talking as she's like breaking the wall. She's talking. This is Jane. I must confess that his affection originated in nothing better than gratitude, or in other words, that a persuasion of her partiality for him had been the only cause of giving her a serious thought. It is a new circumstance in romance, I acknowledge, and dreadfully derogatory of a heroine's dignity, but if it be as new in common life, the credit of a wild imagination will at least be all my own. So
basically, that's cute.
Yeah, but like, he liked her, she liked him, so he liked her.
That happens sometimes.
Says she was guilty only of being less rich than he had supposed her to be.
That's a pretty big thing to be guilty of in 1811 or whatever.
Exactly. Mr. and Mrs. Morland's surprise on being applied to by Mr. Tilney for their consent to his marrying their daughter was, for a few minutes, considerable. It having never entered their head to suspect an attachment on either side, but as nothing, after all, could be more natural than Catherine being beloved, they soon learned to consider it with only the happy agitation of gratified pride, and as far as they alone were concerned, had not a single objection to start.
Aw. I love the little note that they clearly adore her.
Yes.
And that there's nothing more natural than her being like,
beloved. Oh,
that's so nice.
Such a nice thing for a parent to think of their child. So they're like, sure, go for it. But then Henry has to go convince his dick of a dad.
That is a problem, yes.
Yes. Henry returned to what was now his only home to watch over his young plantations and extend his improvements for her sake, to whose share in them he looked anxiously forward, and Catherine remained at Fullerton to cry. And so they're like kind of in this limbo state for a paragraph, because as I talk about at the beginning of the first episode, Jane Austen doesn't give a shit about tying all this stuff up into the last 8 paragraphs of the whole book. And then this is thrown in. We are on the second to last page.
Oh, yeah. Read us the last.
This is the
last good chunk.
This is the second to last page. It says, "The marriage of Eleanor Tilney, her removal from all the evils of such a home as Northanger, had been made by Henry's banishment to the home of her choice and the man of her choice, is an event which I expect to give general satisfaction among all her acquaintances. Never had the general loved his daughter so well in all her hours of companionship, utility, and patient endurance as when he first hailed her, your ladyship." So basically, she, like, finds this man who I guess had stayed with them. She, like, throws in this weird afterthought that the laundry manifest that she had found in that cabinet was this guy's, who has since become a viscount. And so by her marrying very wealthy, the general now just doesn't give a shit about Henry and Catherine, and it, like, opens the door for them to get married. Henry and Catherine were married. The bells rang, and everybody smiled. And as this took place within a 12-month from the first day of their meeting, it will not appear, after all the dreadful delays occasioned by the general's cruelty, that they were essentially hurt by it. To begin perfect happiness at the respective ages of 26 and 18 is to do pretty well. And professing myself moreover convinced that the general's unjust interference, so far from being really injurious to their felicity, was perhaps rather conducive to it, by improving their knowledge of each other and adding strength to their attachment, I leave it to be settled, by whomsoever it may concern, whether the tendency of this work be altogether to recommend parental tyranny or reward filial disobedience. Jane!
Beautiful.
Jane!
The end.
The end.
So this has to be one of the first pieces of fiction where somebody becomes, in a very meta sense, convinced that they are in a work of fiction and then does stupid things because of it, right? Like,
I feel yes.
This has to be one of the first, because we'd only had the novel for about 15 minutes by this point.
Well, right, and you have to think, like, not only is this so groundbreaking, I find a lot of what she was writing just to be groundbreaking, and that it's, like, it's so funny and, like, insightful, but also the fact that she's poking fun at what is basically a genre that's only existed for, like, a decade.
Yeah.
She's already writing a parody.
It's very impressive.
Yes, it's maddening.
This also is another sort of log on the fire of my conviction that the society novel never actually disappeared. It just became the high school movie.
Yeah.
Really and genuinely, I believe that high school movies are society novels and vice versa.
I can get down with that.
And this is very much one of them.
Yes. Oh, for sure.
Like, you could change a small handful of details and...
it could have been a movie with Amanda Bynes in it.
Yes.
And I would have watched it a lot.
So much.
Like, so much.
Incessantly.
I would have been really about it. Maybe Freddie Prinze Jr.'s in it. Here I go again with my super hip and up-to-date cultural references.
You're the best at those.
It is true. I am really good at remembering what was popular when I was in high school. What'd you think?
I loved it.
Same.
I loved every minute of it.
Same.
I sympathize with being an overread and
overzealous teen.
Underexperienced teen.
Yes.
Trying to fumble your way through situations that you do not have the context to understand.
Yep. Primed
only with novels.
And the fact that your parents or your grandparents have told you you're a, quote, old soul.
Well, I don't think Catherine is an old soul.
No, but I mean, like...
Catherine is, as my therapist has said once, a new soul.
I mean, she's a fresh, rosy-cheeked baby soul.
Which I had never heard anyone posit the sort of inverse of the old soul.
No, I've never heard that either. But I like it.
Just like, oh, honey, you're a new soul.
Yeah.
You haven't done this much.
You're not super with it. You're not super experienced. I really loved it. I don't remember liking this one when I read it in high school. I mean, I shouldn't say didn't like it. I just remember not being like that taken with it. I really liked it as an adult because I found it very charming and endearing.
I feel like this is one of those novels where people over the age of 25 would make the mistake of being like, oh, it's about someone who's very young and naive, and then recommend it to an 18-year-old.
No, this is an adult book.
This novel is not meant for 18-year-olds.
No.
This novel is meant for you when you are old enough to look back at yourself at 18.
Yeah, this is a reflective adult novel.
Yes.
Not a novel to recommend to a 17-year-old to read.
No.
Because all the nuance is lost on you at 17.
Correct.
And you're just like, oh, Catherine seems great.
Catherine seems totally normal.
She seems hip and with it and normal and self-possessed.
And her decisions are making sense.
Yes. And oh my God, Isabella, I never saw that coming. Whereas I was like, as soon as she enters the page, I'm like, you. I know you.
Austen, what a gal.
What a gal. Don't just watch the Pride and Prejudice adaptation with Keira Knightley in it.
Which is so good, but there are other things.
But read the books. There's so much funny stuff that they don't ever put into any of them.
That is very true.
Like, Pride and Prejudice is way funnier.
Yeah. Well, we talked about this last episode. Like, it's hilarious.
And you get none of that. It's just all brooding. Which, don't get me wrong, I enjoy.
And there's so much biting social satire in it. And
that all just kind of gets swept.
Except for Mr. Collins and the potatoes. That
I feel like the only parts they keep anymore are Collins and the potatoes and like some of the Mrs. Bennet stuff. But even that's more like uncomfortable than it is like funny.
Yeah, I think Mrs. Bennet, it's weird because I actually feel like Mrs. Bennet, she's supposed to be stress-inducing, not funny.
Yes.
And all the funny stuff is other stuff.
Mm-hmm. But they just don't put it at all.
But we're talking about the wrong novel.
I know, but it's the one that most people listening are going to have the most familiarity with.
I feel like there's not a ton to this novel.
No.
I am still honestly really blown away by how much it's kind of the birth of a weird subgenre, which is person gets too carried away from being too wrapped up in a genre and hilarity ensues. It's great.
Yeah.
But like, it's very straightforward.
Yes.
There's not a lot.
And to her credit, she doesn't do too much that sometimes in parodies, it gets a little too like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But yeah, it's a quick read. I highly recommend that you purchase it from an independently owned bookstore or check it out from your local library and read it.
Well, thanks for bringing it to us.
You are welcome. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Grace, for letting me do the Jane Austen that I wanted to.
I loved it. It was one of the only Jane Austens I hadn't read. I was very excited, and I'm excited still.
There's only 6 to choose from, so...
6 is a pretty good output of novels for a career.
Oh, especially if you look at the timeline in which she wrote them. It's sort of insane.
And then she died tragically young.
Yes, as is the way.
As is the way, indeed. Well, Maddie, thank you for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for being
a friend. You could be a friend of the pod. Follow on Instagram at didntreadit. We were doing different songs. That's fun. That's cool.
All right. And I guess that does it for us this week.
Yeah. A nice light one for your Sunday scaries. Talk down.
I hope your Sunday scaries aren't too bad.
And if they are, just like turn on one of the many Austen adaptations you can easily find.
They are very soothing.
Yes, very, very soothing. Really will bring you some peace.
Yeah.
All right.
And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author because they could really use the love.
Bye.
Bye. Didn't Read It was created, written, recorded, and edited by me, Grace Todd. You can follow the show on Instagram or Twitter at Didn't Read It.
Our theme song is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
For sources cited and a full list of episodes, you can visit us at didntreaditpod.com.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review. It makes a big difference, and we appreciate it immensely.
If you did not enjoy the show, we are accepting applications for a full-time nemesis at didntreaditpod@gmail.com. Special thanks to Black Iris Social Club in Richmond, Virginia, and to Pesca Trio Publishing.